Now, we want to start marking out our holes. Well, it's obviously a good idea if you're working off a generated plot to have a good look round, try and get an idea of where you want your holes to run around the plot you've created. If you find something like a hill is going to be a problem, of course you can always flatten it down, completely change the landscape so you can route your holes through. You might need to do this. Sometimes it's just impossible to route a course nicely around the terrain. So it's up to you whether you start destroying the land you've created, but it's not really an issue if it makes your course better. Another thing you need to remember when routing is that the 9th green should be by the clubhouse on a course, so that if people are playing 9 holes, they can leave and they're right back at the clubhouse. They're not going to have to walk a couple of miles to get back to the clubhouse. So normal routings, of course, have the 9th green and the 18th green around the clubhouse, so you have to take that into account when trying to route your course around, and this can make it a little more difficult as well. What I tend to do is mark out the first hole coming from the clubhouse, and I will mark out the 9th hole and the 10th hole and the 18th hole. Then I know where I'm trying to get to. So if I'm at the 7th hole and I can see the 9th, I know where to take the 8th, or if I'm at the 5th, I know where to go with the 6th, 7th to try and get back so that I'll meet up. So I find that easier way of doing things. Put the 9th in after the 1st, and sometimes I'll work backwards, so I'll put the 9th in and the 8th in, and I'll put the 1st in and the 2nd in. It just makes it easier to meet up in the middle than trying to route a hole and finding you're 650, 700 yards away from the clubhouse on the final hole, and you really wanted to put in a par 4 or par 3. It's a bit too late then, so try and have an idea where your course is going. You can use the line of sight to look around your course, as we've discussed earlier, and you can even mark out roughly, if you want, where your course is going to be by just turning a face into an alternative texture. It could be anything. I could we select our points, we can actually click on the window where we are, and we might want a T here, so we can just mark it out with a different texture. So that's going to be hole T1. Maybe get the tape measure up. Let's measure around. Now it's around about 400 yards to that next hill over there, so maybe start with a par 4, and we could have our green at, say, that's 420 to there. So I could mark that, select a different texture, one I can see easily, and that could be our first hole marked. You could then move to this view here, look around with your camera and think, there's the tee there, where do I want to go now? So maybe up the top of this hill a bit, put the tee up here, and we could head in that direction. Again, let's select a point, use the same tee, select another point. I can see where I'm going on the overhead, so that would take us out in that direction. So you work your way around. I've only got a 1,000-yard plot here to demonstrate at the moment, but you can work out your routing by placing a T and a green face around where you're going to have your course. Once you know where your hole's going to go, the first thing to do is define the boundary and the path for the hole. So this is going to be a path 4 to here. So we go to plan, and this funny looking thing, which is a T-square and something, is define hole path. So I shall click on that, and we get up the par. T boxes we don't need to worry about because we're not going to plant shapes to create these. So all we need to do is click Advanced Settings. Again, we can ignore this because we're not going to use shapes, create shapes. Go to General Settings and select the third one down, which is Create Hole Boundary Shape for Existing Terrain. No other shapes needed. So we check that and click OK, and that will just draw in the boundary and the hole path. I'm going to select path 4 because we decided it's going to be a path 4 there, and all I have to do is, it's already showing a plus, so it wants us to add things. I left click to mark where I want. Now this isn't hold and drag, it's just a click, and you'll see a line with a distance coming. Now while it's red, it won't let us place the mark because it's out of the range it will allow. So it will let us put our first point from around about 160. And if I go too far, again it will go red because it won't allow a point that far away. So normally you're looking around 260, 270 maybe for a drive, so it's not quite normal to put the point at that spot. You don't have to, depends on the shape of your hole obviously, but around there. So I'm going to click it there, and now it's wanting the second shot, and I drag that on the center of the green, which at the moment I've got as sand, but it doesn't matter, it's just to see what it is clearly. I click again, and voila, it's drawn a boundary and it's drawn a hole path. Now this hole path is what the computer players will follow as much as they can, so when they're on the tee they're going to try and drive to this point here. What it'll also do is set the default view when you're standing on the tee. So when we're standing on our tee, before we rotate, we should be looking at that point there. So now I can't see what I've done on here because I have my uncluttered screen, so I would certainly turn on shapes while I was laying out the holes. If I get onto the right tee, let's go back here. And turn around, and you'll see the line in 3D is following the terrain to give us an idea of where the hole's going. So we've got our hole marked out. We'd then click up to hole 2, and start on our next hole again. Let's take the line of sight from this tee. I'm going to look in that direction there. So maybe just a nice short hole down somewhere there. So again, I can go back to terrain and face and select a face down there. And it's sometimes quite hard to judge distance. You think, oh, that'll make a nice hole, and then you measure it and it's far too far away or too near or whatever, because it's very hard to get an idea of scale when you're looking at the perspective view. So take the tape measure out and just quickly check what that is. Well, that's 340. I wanted to make a par 3 here, so that's a bit too long. I could make a short par 4 instead. It's tempting, but I might as well show a par 3 for demonstration purposes, so we'll move that point in a bit. Let's try that measurement there. Whoops. Undo. I forgot to turn my tape measure back on. There we go. So that's at 250. Still a bit long for a par 3, but it's downhill, so it's probably quite playable at that range. It's a bit tucked away there. I think I'd prefer it out here somewhere. Maybe there. So I'll turn that to sand, select, and go back to plan, and we're on the define hole, and we want this time to add a par 3. Now, as long as we haven't rebooted APCD, we don't have to go back in and check that third defined path. If we do save it here and then tomorrow come along and try and put the next hole in, it will default back to the first option, which will draw in lots of shapes. So it will be set on the wrong option again. It won't save that in your preferences, unfortunately. So you'll have to go back into advanced settings and check the third one down again. Cancel. So this is a par 3. It's ready to add. We've changed that to hole 2. So click in the tee, drag it to the green. If ever I'm dragging it and decide to cancel it, I can right click and it will stop. So we can use that to cancel, but click in there and click on the green, and it's added the path and the boundary. Now these can be edited just like any other shape. The boundary, if we go to adjust shape and click on the boundary, you'll see it's made up of points exactly like all the other shapes, and we can add points and drag them to create whatever sort of boundaries we want. I'll talk about boundaries a bit more later and some of the things you need to be wary of, but I'm just going to demonstrate you can move them. Same with the tee position of the path, that can be selected as well. If we go on select, the points can be selected and moved. Let's go to the par 4 to demonstrate that. If we go to move, you'll see if I click on that point, I can actually, whoops, it's selected. Because this outline was selected, it's moved the whole plot, the whole path. So go back a couple of places because I've moved it. Yeah, the reason that whole thing moved is because this is highlighted because we've just selected it. So if I click off and now click on just the point, I can move the point without moving the boundary. So I can reposition this. It'll only, again, let us move it as far as its minimum and maximum settings will allow, but we can reposition it. The tee and the green are locked here, so if you want to move those, once we've drawn our green in, we'll be altering those. You uncheck them, you can then move these. While they're locked, I can't pick that point up at all. It's fixed. So you just need to lay out 18 holes and we'll be ready for the next step.